Esselamun Aleyküm ve Rahmetullah. Ana Said bi wajidi ma'akum. Kayf halukum? That's it. That's my Arabic. Before I start, I want to thank Dr. Huda Shaban for organizing this important event and her invitation for me to join and meet with wonderful distinguished guests. And I also thank Kuwait Association for Learning Differences and Mrs. Amal El-Sayer. It's a pleasure. And also, I would like to honor and acknowledge our host institution, the American University of Kuwait, specifically Dr. Nazi Hamza. Himza. Last but not least, I'd like to thank you, the distinguished audience, the distinguished Kuwait educators, psychologists, and education leaders. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. Definitely.
Hopefully, we will be able to post all the presentation on the Kuwait Association for Learning Differences website.
Thank you for the question. Now you can focus on me. Don't have to take notes. I may have an exam after this presentation, so be ready. All right. My name is Aydin. I'm an assistant professor at UW, University of Wisconsin-Madison. My background is in psychology. I was a clinical psychologist, and I'm originally from Turkey. Last night, I was at my hotel, saw some Turkish shows on Kuwaiti television. I was happy to see that. And it's a pleasure to be honored to be over here because the people, language, and the culture is very close. So it's almost like going home. I miss my home, so it's a great opportunity for me. My background was in clinical psychology. I work with trauma survivors, mostly trauma survivors and refugees who are experiencing academic and behavioral difficulties. My work was in Sudan, Russian Federation, Turkey, United States, and Germany. Then I did my second work in special education. I mostly work with students with behavioral difficulties who are experiencing horrific academic outcomes and life outcomes. And now I'm leading a research project called Culture Responsive Behavioral Support. It's a statewide research project. And I'm a faculty affiliate at the Wisconsin Center for Educational Research. And also, I'm the director of CRPBS. I'm going to give you the key ideas of this presentation, then we can go home. Should we do that? Promise, everything is going to be great. So I'm going to have this slide later, but this is very important for us to understand. I think my presentation, Dr. Spencer's presentation, following Dr. Barkley's presentation, are complementing each other very well. Dr. Barkley was focusing on the individuals, cognitive, behavioral, neuropsychological functions of individuals with attention deficit disorders. Dr. Spencer's presentation is focusing on the assessment. What could teachers or special educators, what kind of assessment they could use to better inform their decisions? And my presentation is looking at the more system level, school-wide, classroom-wide. My presentation is about what happens if we have 2 students with ADHD, just like Dr. Barkley described, in a classroom, along with the 3 students with learning disabilities. There are some students we don't know, we don't have a diagnosis, but they are struggling in reading, math. And how about 3 more students who are constantly fighting, getting into trouble? And what if some of the students are coming from low-income families? What if some students don't even speak Arabic? They are from Philippines, they are from India, they are from other countries. Their parents are over here, immigrants. As teachers, we experience those challenges every day, right? We don't have a magical box and say, stop. Now I'm going to analyze, I'm going to diagnose, and I'm going to treat you, and everything is going to be fine. It doesn't work that way. In our daily lives, we juggle multiple things, right? We have to work with the general education teachers. We have to work with the parents. And we have to work with the communities. We have to work with our administrators. And again, most of the time, we don't have the clear diagnosis at our hand. And those diagnoses may change. Therefore, I think we need to rely on the science, but the science should be expanded from individual to collective. So what we know from the research, my research is informed by the psychology, but also organizational studies, cultural psychology, and trying to figure out how individuals, teachers, professionals, families, students, and community members, advocates, education leaders can get together and create a better, inclusive, and more supportive environment. To be able to do that, I brought this slide to you. So those are the key ideas. And my presentation is informed by those ideas. First, improve context, improve learning. This is very important. Context matters. We often focus on individual child or individual teachers so much, and we don't see the context in which they are functioning. If we create more positive, more supportive environment, students learn much better. We have experimental studies conducted in that. So they put together two groups of students coming from the same background, actually very challenging backgrounds, living in the very impoverished neighborhoods, and their parents are not educated, they are immigrants or minority kids who are not welcome, and living in the very impoverished neighborhoods. They took one group of students with the same background and placed them in the very rich learning environment, better schools, cleaner, nicer, high-quality teachers, where they are challenged, where they are expected to do higher things, better things, where teachers are seeing their strengths, not deficits, where they can have extracurricular activities. They go to zoos, science exhibitions, and other group of students attended their neighborhood schools, where teachers are staying in the same school. Administrators are changing constantly. Budget cuts are over there. There are lots of fights, police presence. Very dysfunctional school. Those two group of students, guess what happened? Even in a few months, the kids with the same background, students with the same background, who are placed in the better school, much improve in reading, math, and social competence than the students who are stayed in that kind of dysfunctional environment. We can often, and we should understand, individual abilities and disabilities, exceptionalities. We all have that. But what we know from the research is this. If we place individuals in a dysfunctional environment, where often people are focused on their deficits, where they don't get high-quality math, science, where they don't have a good positive environment, they are going to be dysfunctional. Functional environment creates functional individuals. Dysfunctional environment creates dysfunctional individuals. Second key idea is, I call ABC. Academic and behavior, two sides of the same coin, meaning we cannot separate academic qualities, outcomes of the individuals from the behavioral outcomes and qualities of the individuals. So if students are struggling behaviorally, they are going to struggle academically as well, because academic is not just, we are not putting them in some kind of laboratory, open their brain, and put the knowledge in them, right? It doesn't work that way. Learning is a social environment, social place, where you are rested, just like you took a break. Now you're going to learn everything much better. Where people are more friendly, more warm, which means you belong here. You feel confident. You feel comfortable. You are going to learn much better, right? So students who are experiencing behavior problems, they may not attend the classroom context very well. Teachers may not treat them welcome. B, because of their academic difficulties, they may also demonstrate behavioral problems, right? So to be able to understand the academic difficulties in reading, writing, math, we need to understand behavioral difficulties and vice versa. The third concept is invest in what works. It seems so simple. It seems so simple, meaning that we need to invest in what works. Usually what we call them as evidence-based practices, scientific practices. Often we cannot do that. Sometimes we just follow the things that how our teachers used to train us, educate us, right? Sometimes we join the environment, joining schools where other teachers are doing certain practices, and we follow them, we copy them, right? Sometimes what we do as teachers, psychologists, work, but often we don't repeat the same thing. So using evidence-based practice is important. Being positive and proactive rather than deficit-oriented and reactive, meaning this. If we see the students as their symptoms, let's say we just covered the students with ADHD and we understand their struggles. But when we work with those students, they are coming in front of us. When we are assessing, when we are working with them, we need to focus on what they can do, what kind of strengths they are bringing, their families are bringing, what kind of strengths their community is bringing over here. Family support, teacher support, and what those students can do. Academically, he may fail. He may not read well, but maybe there's something in science he's doing very well. Right? So strength-based is always more effective than the focusing on the strengths of the students. Building on strengths of the students is always important. Same thing for our teachers too. When I work with the administrators and principals, I hear the same stories again. These teachers are struggling. These teachers are doing this or failing this, lacking this. And I turn the question around. What's good about your school? What are you guys very good at doing? What you have been doing is working. Let's start with that. Build on the strength. And the proactive is very interesting because, again, my background is in psychology. We often, how we treat the students with behavior problems or learning problems, as Ms. Sayer mentioned, that the wait to fail approach. They demonstrate those kind of problem behaviors, and then what we do? We react. Don't stay like this in my class. Get out of here. And I create distractions in my classroom, and make the child more visible, right? And then escalate. What if the child is saying something back to you? That detention, right? So being proactive seems like very logical. We often do. I have 2 kids, and almost like it's impossible to be reactive. Let's say I found my daughter yesterday drawing our wall. Wonderful, she's expressing herself, but I didn't want her to do that, right? And my son is just, I don't know, he wants to watch iPad constantly. My reaction is always, don't do this, do that after the fact, right? So being proactive, meaning lay out the rules, establish those rules, and follow them. So that child and you and your partner will understand and follow those rules. So predictability is always important. Inclusion is beneficial for everyone. Inclusion works. We know from the research that when we include students with disabilities in general education classroom, in our business settings, individuals with disabilities benefit the most. Not just socially, because they are understanding human exceptionalities, which means they become better individuals, better citizens. But also, research is showing that they do much better academically than behaviorally. Students with disabilities are benefiting from including working with the students with disabilities in the same classroom. Again, we need to focus on the whole system. Let's say you establish a great relationship. You're working with one student very well, but the rest of the classroom is not functional. What are you going to do? Let's say you and your partner teacher work greatly in your classroom, and you establish perfect routines. Everyone is learning, everyone is engaging, but they go to playground, and there are different rules. They are getting to fight. How about they go to other classroom, working with other teachers? That's why we need to focus on the whole school context. If you are in the special education school, that my colleagues are over here working, we need to work with the old teachers, general education, special education teachers. We need to work with the other kind of support, social workers, psychologists. We need to work with the even people who are serving and cleaning, people who are driving the bus, families and community members. Because again, to be able for an intervention to be successful, it should be sustained across multiple settings. So this is what we know from the research. Blur the boundaries. This division is very important and very historical. I'll tell you more about this one. Special education teachers are working with the students with disabilities. General education teachers are working with the other populations, and they rarely interact. What we do in our work right now, and I'm going to present a little bit later in RTI, response to intervention, we blur the boundaries. We bring together all of those resources, because special education teachers are good at certain things, and general education teachers are the same way too. And having them in the same classroom will benefit everyone. So we need to blur the boundaries and use the resources together, not separately. And lastly, the culture responsive, adaptive, and sustained. Here's my key point over here. Again, I'm from Turkey. I understand this concept. I got my education in the US. Often, what I see is a faulty approach from the, let's say, the US researchers' perspective. We develop these models, let's say RTI, PBIS, those great interventions. And we are just saying, this is how you're supposed to do. But we don't know the context. What works in Wisconsin may not directly work in Kuwait. It's not going to work in Turkey. It's not going to work in Lebanon. What we need to do, actually, we need to understand the local context, local system, and adapt and tailor those interventions. Matter of fact, the model I'm talking about, response to intervention, developers are saying that this is not a prepackaged program. You cannot take this one and put it in somewhere else. It's not like Coca-Cola, you're shipping from US to Kuwait. It doesn't work that way. So what we need to do, actually, we need to take those kind of research-based practices, make our own. What will work in our school? What will work in our country? Within our culture? Within our language? And last but not least, the continuous transformation work, expansive learning. We can get very comfortable about the status quo, taking for granted things, basically things we do every day. But what we need to do as educators, we always do, we adapt, we constantly change, continuously improve our practices and adapt them. So that not just only students with disabilities, but students without disabilities. Not just only students, but us, educators, service providers, are going to learn and get much better. Don't you want to, isn't that very important for educators and psychologists to be in this job? Because we learn every day new things, right? We are changing. We are learning from our students. We are learning from our colleagues. We are learning from our families. That's why this job is so rewarding, because we are developing. Once we stop developing, learning, we start to do the same thing, same routine, we start to see the loss of turnover. People are going to leave the occupation. Actually, in the US, we are experiencing that. Almost 50% of the teachers, special education teachers, are leaving their jobs. They don't teach anymore in their first 5 years. There are multiple factors for this one, but one is we want teachers to act like robots. It doesn't work. So these practices are important, not just for our students, but for us as well. Okay. This is our agenda. I'm going to introduce this model called response to intervention. Could you raise your hands, if you don't mind, if you are familiar with and you know response to intervention, RTI? Wonderful. Definitely. Okay. So, but I'm going to take this one. This is an academic intervention focusing on the whole school context to improve the high-quality learning opportunities for all students and provide the support to students as needed. I'll tell you more about this one. But I just want to take a different spin on this one. As Dr. Shaban suggested, I think it's the future of the special education. integrated model, where we are providing behavioral support and academic support together, not separate, together. And I'm going to talk about multi-tier prevention and intervention models. This is the latest interventions in special education. And I'm going to put them in the historical context of the United States, because then you can see this one, where those ideas are coming from in the US context. And when you are taking your own, making your own, then you can adapt to your country, your school. I'm going to talk about challenges and opportunities and our project, in which we put together special education teachers, general education teachers, administrators, family members, and students together, and they make decisions about their schools. That's a very cool project. I'll tell you more about this one. Those are the students with disabilities, students who are struggling the most. We gave them power to make decisions about their education and their school. That was very empowering. I'll tell you more about this one, but the age was K through 12. So the students join us in the middle school and high school level, but parents join us throughout those 3 layers. And I'll answer more questions. I'm going to leave some question part at the end so that we can have a more interaction. All right, this is RTI. I'm sure you are familiar with this triangle. Very simple. I'm not going to get into detail. I know that there are lots of educational opportunities KALD is providing to learn about this. But RTI is this. Rather than focusing on the individual student, one student with learning disability, other student who cannot read and write, other student who's struggling with math, rather than focusing on them, we focus on the whole school. Let's say, how many of you guys, could you raise your hands, how many of you guys are working at a school? Perfect. So, thank you. Majority of us. As we know that, I mentioned that to you. So as we know that there are lots of students moving through, there are lots of teachers, families, schools are large places. So what we do over here is this. The bottom part of this triangle is focusing on the interventions for all students, regardless of their ability or disability. All students. All means all. Everyone is receiving evidence-based reading interventions. Everyone is receiving high-quality math interventions. And the second tier assumption is that some students are going to still struggle, right? We provide them best interventions, but they are going to struggle. They need more help. Rather than send them directly to special education or label them as disabled, what we do actually, we provide them more intensive interventions. We are not removing the kids. We are providing the services more intensively in small groups for those students. They say 5 to 15% of the school population. And still, some of them are going to be struggle. They are going to have a hard time with reading, writing. For those students, we provide more individualized interventions, high-intense interventions, maybe after-school programs, right? And over here, we start to work with the special education teachers. So general education teachers, special education teachers, school psychologists are working together in this system. They are not separate entities. They are working together. So RTI model is this. This is the behavioral side of the RTI, called positive behavioral interventions and support. Same logic. So in all of the students, all schools, and staff and faculty are interacting with each other more positively. Rules are visible. Students know the expectations, consequences. Teachers are the same way too, which means if you are teaching the first grade and the second grade classroom, they have the same rules in terms of behaviors. Be respectful, be kind, be supportive. So these are school-wide rules. And every morning, they repeat those rules, which means they learn those rules. And when they are making those rules, actually, they involve all staff and sometimes students too. So rather than creating this kind of great relationship between teacher and student, what we do actually, we create a great relationship among students and adults. Over here, our intervention is not just focusing on the students, but teachers as well. Sometimes teachers need help, right? As a new teacher, you may not know everything. Or if you are teaching 20 students and 3 of them are giving you a hard time, sometimes you need a break, right? What we do have over there, we have only one tool. We kick the students out our classroom, or we talk, we just work with them, but what if we need help? Who's going to provide us help, right? What if third grade teacher is doing something so good? Can we learn from her? Can she teach us that, right? So teachers getting together and start to make those decisions about the whole school community, making decisions. So same logic for the behavioral. Again, different names, RTI and PBIS, Positive Behavioral Intervention and Support, but the same logic. Is this clear? They were developed separately because in special education we have this division. Learning disabilities and academic aspect of disability is one part. Behavioral aspect, behavioral difficulties, psychological disorders, another part. They are different fields. We are merging them together. So 4 key elements for PBIS over here. Outcomes, which means we need to continue to collect data. So do you remember I was telling you one of the key ideas? Invest in what works. How do you know what works? We collect data, right? We are not going to wait if the student is graduating or not. We collect normative data, normative assessment, formative assessment. So which means we have the normative assessment, test scores, and other stuff, but we are also collecting formative assessments, which means we measure the student's progress continuously. While we are doing that, actually, we are focused on the whole school context. We are not just focused on students with disabilities over here. We are focused on the other students as well. Again, inclusion works. To be able to inclusion the work, we need to look at the whole school context. Because other key principle is that if your school is failing, your students are going to fail. Students with disabilities are going to experience that failure much more. And we can just say, hey, they have a disability, that's why they are failing. Right? Almost like blaming the victim approach, which is quite illogical in the sense because we are educators. If we are working with them, we provide them high-quality learning opportunities, they should be successful. So that's why we need to, as educators, continue to collect data. But to be able to do that, we need to create some kind of uniform method so that I can understand if I'm having the third grade students, I need to understand his or her scores coming from second grade, right? So we need to, as a whole school, we need to be on the same page through data. So we need to use data to understand the student outcomes and see if our interventions are working. Do you remember Dr. Backley was talking about academic interventions and behavioral interventions for students with ADHD, right? And we collect data and we understand their performances and see if those interventions are working. But it's not only, that's not enough. We need to compare those performances against the whole school, right? How they are doing compared to their peers. We need to focus on the whole school system. We need to collect and analyze data. We need to also use evidence-based practices. In PBIS and RTI, again, this is the newest trend. We are combining them now. Those triangles, we are combining. So we are having an integrated, unified model in which we provide academic support along with the behavioral support with the same logic. Universal interventions for all students, we are being proactive. We don't wait them to fail. We provide them high-quality learning opportunities. This is almost like this. If you don't feed kids, right? They are going to be weak. They are not going to develop well, right? So what we do, we feed them. We don't wait our kids to get hungry, our children to get hungry, right? Same thing over here is too. We need to make sure that our students are welcomed. They know the rules, expectations, and consequences of their actions. We provide our students high-quality science instruction, math instruction. Even though they have disabilities, provide them. And we have high expectations from them. We know that they can do much better. Because as teachers, special education teachers and psychologists, we know that through and through. We know those students for whom other people don't expect so much. But in a year and two, they improve so much and surprise everyone, right? But sometimes we miss those students. And they quit the school. They don't like the school anymore because they are failing constantly. Or we are putting them in a school where the instruction is boring, right? So we don't want boring instruction and low expectations. So we integrate school systems. But while we are doing that, who's going to make decisions? This is the key point. In the United States, this is the key point. Who's making the decisions for your school? In RTI and PBS, answer is everyone. It's a nice idea, but to be able that idea to be functional, we need to form teams, school-based teams, to make decisions about the consequences, types of interventions, who's going to analyze data, who's going to present data. Okay, we present data, and what we do is not working. Who's going to change those interventions, instructions? All right. Now the second part of my presentation. Are you guys with me? You're doing okay? You don't need a break? All right. I learned some Arabic songs I can sing for you guys. No, I don't do that. I don't bore you with that. Again, as a person who lived in multiple countries and worked in multiple countries, I'm with you guys over here. I understand the challenges and struggles because you learn textbooks, information coming from different countries. And your task is to make your own. But they don't provide those kind of guidance, how to make your own. They just say, these are the practices you need to follow. A, B, C, D, E. But our countries are different. Our religions are different. Our cultures are different. Our expectations from our kids are different. Our challenges and opportunities are different, right? So all of those programs have a home. They are developed based on their needs, their country's needs and interests. Therefore, I'm presenting how the RTI or integrated models are developed in the United States so that you can take those interventions and make them your own. So this is a simple chart basically showing the current population. In the United States, we have approximately 6.5 million students identified with disabilities. In our special education law, we have 13 disability categories included. So for a student to receive special education services, he or she needs to be identified with one of those 13 disability categories. That's the condition in the United States. It's not a condition in the UK. So they may provide special education services over there without identification. But in the US, we have to have a disability label. So majority of our students are labeled with specific learning disability, which is your organizations. But this is the primary disability category. If you look at those secondary disability categories or comorbid disabilities, almost half of the LD students have behavioral difficulties, behavioral problems identified, and vice versa. Students identified as in the emotional disturbance or psychological problems, they have also learning disabilities as secondary identifications most of the time. In the historical context of the United States, we had the institutions and asylums for individuals with disabilities, individuals with mental disorders, individuals with physical disorders. And then we have special education classes in public schools. Began in 1860s. So we had special schools for individuals with disabilities. And began as separate facilities, then self-contained classrooms. So those separate facilities, we had the general public schools, and we have special education schools. Then they merged. But students with disabilities were educated in separate classrooms in the United States. Basically, they were sharing the same building, but they were not sharing the same classrooms. They were not sharing the same teachers. Matter of fact, actually, even in my lifetime, I remember students with disabilities were not taking the same time. They are not taking their breaks during the same time. So students without disabilities might not see their peers with disabilities. They were very segregated, even within the same school. Then comes 1970s, the civil rights movements informed the 1970s. Parents advocated for their children's rights, and then we had the special education law, IDEA. Its name was different at that time, but IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That required all students with disabilities to be educated in the public education system, inclusively. So our last and most important part is inclusion. I just want to show you this one. This is, again, the US context so that you can understand and compare to your own context. Make this intervention your own. In US, schools were also separated before 1950 by race. This might be a different concept in Kuwait, but African-American students, black students in the US couldn't go to same schools with their white peers. So let's say these are the general public, these are the African-American population, and these are the students with disabilities. Different disabilities were educated in different schools. Students with, let's say, mental retardation, students with psychological problems, deaf and blind students, they were all separate. The buildings were separate. 1954, we had a rule called the Brown versus Board of Education, which assured that the students with African-American students are going to be educated alongside with the white students. Because the issue was that they were separate but not equal. So schools where African-American students are attending, they were in very bad condition. They didn't have good educational opportunities. They didn't have good physical opportunities. So bringing them together, our hope was to improve their opportunities. But this law excluded students with disabilities. 20 years later, exactly 20 years later, with the special education law, IDEA, now educators are, school principals have to include all students with disabilities, all students coming from different races. But again, they were in the same building, but they were getting different education. Now with the inclusion, new movement is this, putting them in the same classroom, same learning environment, as a part of the exceptional diverse learning environment. With the RTI, they were in the same room, they were in the same classroom, right? Teachers working together. With the RTI, now we are providing interventions for everyone. Is that clear, that transition? They were separate. Now all of the interventions, academic interventions, behavioral interventions, rules were equal. Before, they were not. They were punishing special education students for doing something very different than they were doing differently the students without disabilities. They were punishing African-American students for more subjective reasons versus the white students or the white American students were receiving different educational opportunities and treatments. With RTI, we try to equalize and improve the qualities. So here's the new model. Students struggle in school. I'm sorry, this is a special education model in the United States right now. Students struggle in school. We have the referral process, IEP, Individualized Education Plan. I'm not sure if you have it in Kuwait. Tomorrow, during the workshop, we are going to talk more about this one. I'm going to learn from you guys, and I'm going to exchange some ideas with you. All right? So then we have the Tier 2, Tier 3 supports for all students and special education placement. But the question is, does special education help students to achieve at the level of their peers? How do we know that? Assessment. Great. All right, so this is the process in a different perspective, but the assessment is very important. We need to obtain the parents' permission. Evaluation is conducted by multidisciplinary team. This is very key. Do you remember I said that we are moving from individual child to whole system? Same thing with you, individual teacher to all teachers or team members. So it used to be like this. Teachers usually spend most of their times in their classrooms. Actually 80% of the time, they don't even leave their classrooms, let alone working with other educators. Special education teachers were working somewhere else. General education teachers were working somewhere else. School psychologists had their own offices separate. Social workers have their offices. And students were moving among them. But they rarely communicate. They are in the same building. So we are moving that through multidisciplinary team. Actually, IDEA, even the first version of IDEA in 1975, required multidisciplinary team is making decisions. Because again, school psychologists bring their perspectives, special education teachers can bring their perspectives, which means we can use more resources, right? All right. This is my diagram. I've been working on this one. It's a little bit crazy. Bear with me. So historically, we had these individual interventions, academic interventions, math curriculum, science curriculum, reading interventions, right? As special education teachers and psychologists, I use them all. I did the one-on-one therapies, functional behavioral analysis, all of those things. But historically, what we were focusing on, individual. Then we start to have, 1970s, we had this movement. What if we put together our forces? Unite the educators, school psychologists. Then we had the student support and intervention teams in our field. And those teams gave rise to positive behavioral intervention and support. That's the behavioral triangle. Do you remember that? And the RTI. That's the academic triangle. So we are moving from individual through those initiatives to system, whole system level. But we are here right now. We have those problems. A, educational outcome gap. RTI and PBS work for children. Actually, it works for students to improve their performances, but not for all children. Students coming from low-income families, students coming from minority, linguistic minority backgrounds in the United States, students who are learning English, students who are African American or Native American. You know, we have Native American students, as well as the Latino students, which is the highest majority population, mostly coming from Mexico and Latin American countries. And those students are still failing, which means PBS works for students who are coming from middle class, from educated families. But also, if the students are coming from low-income families, the minority backgrounds, PBS doesn't work, RTI doesn't work. So we have this challenge as educators, researchers. We are facing this challenge. The second challenge is the fidelity of implementation. This is tricky. So for a model to be successful, you need to follow that model, right? So if you don't follow that model, how are you going to measure if it's effectiveness or not? So education scholars like me are now working on to implement RTI and PBS in different contexts, following the same principles, but at the same time adapting, adjusting those models to fit into local contexts. Those are our challenges, tensions, struggles, which I love. Tensions are good, which means there is something to be fixed over there, right? There's a desire to change. So those are tensions. The last tension I put over here is cultural responsiveness, which means adapting these models in a responsive manner to your culture, Kuwaiti culture. How are we going to do that? So tomorrow we are going to investigate that a little bit more. And my solution in my research, which I'm going to talk about, is family-school community partnership to move to a new zone where everyone is learning new things. Teachers are challenged. Families and communities are collaborated. OK, this is the model. This is the research project. This is a statewide research project funded by the Department of Public Instruction, State Education Agency. And they said, OK, you are a good researcher. I'm a good researcher. They said, take this money and do this research, and everything's going to be great. I said, no, it doesn't work that way. I said, you need to work with me. And I need to work with the educators, rather than telling them what to do, because they know their context better than I do. It's their house. Almost like I'm coming over here telling you what to do. And you'll smile and nod and just go and say, you don't know our context, right? So rather than standing over here, I said, OK, I'm just going to get down, sit in the same table, work with educators. I'm going to bring my research perspective. I can bring some data analysis. I brought my grad students. I said, we can help you analyze data. They said, no, we know how to analyze data. Why don't you bring us this? So we started building those kind of partnerships. I said, who's missing in this table? Who's missing in this table? Students. This is a picture taken from the DC It's a congressional hearing. Those are the experts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is an expert panel. And those experts are talking about what? Guess what? Women's rights. What did you notice over here in this expert panel? I'm not going to make a statement about the gender, but think about that. When we sit together, talk about our students, who are we missing? Families too, right? So as you can see, they are very expert. As a man, I know it's funny. I can understand. But this is mostly happen. Who makes decisions for our schools? So I said, why don't we have these triangles? Do you remember RTI triangles, PBS triangles united? For families and university, because we are a part of that conversation too. Because I train teachers. Teachers are placed in those schools, right? I have that relationship. And then State Department of Education. They are decision makers. Again, we can create great schools. We can create great classrooms. But if you don't get enough support, if our education system is not learning from us, our own teachers, our own classrooms, let's say we have great schools. Does the Kuwait education system is learning from those great schools to spread out those great ideas? Those are very important issues. So in a state education department, I said, you are not just going to give me the money to do the research. You need to be with me as partners and commit to this work. Because whatever we are going to develop in those schools, we selected 3 schools, whatever we are going to develop those schools are going to be your statewide implementation. Actually, we finished the project. Now the whole state is implementing our model. I didn't develop that model looking at beautiful Wisconsin view. I just developed those models along with my colleagues, educators, psychologists, family members, community representatives, even some religious organization representatives, because they were important in the community and they were providing services. And other kind of organizations, for example, what we call the Urban League, Boys and Girls Club, YWCA, and the school districts, our university, different partner school network, and Centro Hispano for these students who are Latino backgrounds. So we put together this coalition to develop this research. So research starts to become a practice, and practice and research start to become informing each other. So what we did actually is this. We analyzed the whole state data. Do you remember the assessment part? What we do for the classroom, I said, do we do that for the whole state? They collect data, but they rarely analyze in a sense like what we did. We look at the student level factors, and we said, if all students are receiving high quality outcomes, good outcomes. Do you remember I was telling, now we are in this, those students are in the same school, but they don't have the same educational outcomes. So what we analyze is the gender, free and reduced lunch. This is an indicator of students who are coming from poverty. If they are eligible for free and reduced price lunch, which means they are coming from low-income families. Students' background, Asian, African-American, Latino, Hispanic, Native American, or American Indian. English language learners, ELL. Do you have a large population of Arabic learners in schools? Okay. And we look at also reading test scores and math test scores. This is for special education placement for BD, behavioral disorders. Did you see that? We are combining those academic and behavior even in our data analysis. We look at the interaction between the identification of psychological problems and reading and math scores. Guess what we found? The lower reading and math scores predict the identification of the behavioral problems. So if those students are struggling with reading and math, they are going to more likely be placed in the special education for behavioral problems, psychological problems. So after we analyzed the whole data, school data, states data, we went to schools. We went to schools. We formed these groups called Learning Lab. There wasn't such a thing, Learning Lab. We named it. I developed the Learning Lab. The aim is the goal of the Learning Lab is to design an integrated system of academic and behavioral support at a school. This is a research-based program to make show how to combine academic and behavioral interventions together and make it locally meaningful, which means it's culture responsive to your local school context. So we formed the teams, learning lab teams, teachers, family members, students, school leaders, community representatives, district staff, and university partners. They got together once a month throughout the whole school year. And their task was to examine the school's existing academic and behavioral support system. And then outcome, a culture responsive integrated system. Okay. This is very unique. We went to schools and we told them this is how we are going to follow. By the way, I'll be happy to provide also my article that shows us how to implement the learning lab process. And tomorrow I'll tell you more about this one. But this is about using those 4 principles of the integrated systems. Systems, practices, outcomes, and data. But rather than one group of educators are doing the systems, practices, outcome, and data, we open up that decision maker. Do you remember that table, expert panel? We open up that expert panel. So we formed the learning lab, and teachers, principal, I work with the principal. I said, who you like to work with? Because those are your partners. You are not going to invite parents to educate them. Because this is a little bit looking down, right? But parents know their kids. I know my kids much more than the teachers. Teachers are doing very important work. They know my child in the academic setting, but I know my child in home setting and outside the school. So we can combine and unite our forces, right? So I said, you're inviting parents to not to educate them, not to lecture them, but work with them as partners. You're inviting special education teachers, general education teachers, not to provide them training, professional development, but just hear them out. And so that they can bring their experiences and knowledge into this decision making. So they formed the teams. And the same thing for the students, I'm sorry. I don't want to forget that. We are not bringing the students to see what you need to learn about this one, to lecture them. Or see how nice you can just talk with us. No, no. They have lots of knowledge and insight they can bring to us. So let's use them. So what they did actually is very simple. They formed the group, this inclusive group. Then they start the question here and now. What they are experiencing right now. What's the most challenging things that you're experiencing? Again, those things may change from one school to another school. Schools are so diverse. We cannot have the one prescription, one solution that will be applicable to all schools, right? Your school is very different than the school next to you, right? So what they do actually, what's our challenges in this school? For example, in in elementary school, they said, we have a large group of students who are homeless. They don't have homes. They are living in hotels. They are living in different places. They are struggling. Our school was functioning very well. Then we have these students, and we don't have school psychologists and support staff to help them. And unfortunately, they are going to fail. They want to be proactive and address those needs. Middle school, they were struggling with the English language learners. How to include them, how to include the parents. They know the students are doing well, but they didn't have the communication between the parents and the school. They want to improve that. At the high school was a different story. So they make their own here and now. What is your challenge? And we can apply this one tomorrow. We are going to do that. I'm going to ask you guys, what's your challenge? Because again, once we understand the problem, once we identify the problem, but again, identifying problem, who's making that identification? Whose problem is that? Do you remember the expert panel? Women's issue, all 6 men are talking about the women's issue. They are going to prioritize and privilege their perspective, right? So students' perspective, the issue might be very different than the teacher's perspective. Parents' perspective might be very different than the student's perspective. But altogether, they can form more collective understanding of the school's problem, right? Let's say our students included in the general education schools, our students with disabilities, and they are bullied. They don't want to come to school, right? So we may not notice that. What we can see is actually they don't want to come to school, they don't want to do homeworks, they are crying, they are sad, and we can say because of their disability. They are struggling, they don't know, but we miss that the whole important picture. They are being bullied. So if we don't include them, if we don't hear them out, we cannot understand, and we cannot solve the problem. So after that, they analyze their own data. They look at the school data. They look at the numbers, how many students are receiving office discipline referrals for suspension, expulsion, how many students are failing below the average grade, average reading, math level. So they look at all of those things, as well as their own experience. Teachers are saying what's working in their school and what's not working. Parents are saying what's working, what's not working. So after that, I said, okay, what is your academic support system in the whole school? What do you do if I'm struggling as a student? And I'm working with a new teacher, and I'm struggling students. What would you do? I asked teachers, family members in the learning lab, whole learning lab, to map out their program, their curriculum, school-wide curriculum. Not in the classroom, school-wide curriculum. What happens, I'm struggling, and Dr. Shaban is just my teacher, how she's going to manage my behavioral problems, right? It seems so simple, straightforward. But don't forget that. At these schools, and most of the US schools, teachers, families, students, administrators don't get together and analyze their system. They don't do that. So this was first time, not only bring them together, but also they look at their own whole curriculum, behavioral curriculum, academic curriculum together. And once you have that system in hand, and actually they print it out. They draw the boxes and circles. I'll show you more. Once they do that, they start to examine what's working in the system, what's not working. And ask them, okay, what's your ideal system? Best system. You have the most important, most significant power in this world. You have the magical wand. And you can do whatever you want. You can create the best schools. Don't you want it? Let's say you got the lottery. You got 5 million Kuwaiti dinars, which is very much, I guess. I mean, Kuwait dinar is very valuable. I learned that yesterday. So you have 5 million Kuwaiti dinars, and you are going to form your own school. What would you like the school to be for everyone? Positive, supportive, inclusive. So I asked them, same question. Collectively, they designed their ideal system, and they combined the real system they have, an ideal system, and put them together. And they developed their culturally responsive integrated system. And their task was to not just create the system, but implement. So district and state and school leadership gave them power to design their system, to be implementing the system next school year. This is an ideal scenario. This is perfect. Basically, educators, family members, which means local school community, design their curriculum together in 1 year, and the next year and on, they implement that model. Given the time, I just want to show you the final product. This is the middle school, what I call the Raga middle school. They developed their system into 3 steps. They identify into 3 steps: proactive steps, behavioral support, and data review and reflection. Proactive step is mostly about academic engagement. They said, to be able to address the behavioral problems, we need to address the academic. To be able to address the academic problems, we need to address the behavior, hand in hand. But also, we need to learn from our own practices so that we can develop an adaptive system. Because no system is so perfect that will work all the time. Your students are going to change. Your staff will change, right? You need to somehow adjust. So you need to learn, just like what we do in our life. We adapt, right? Adaptiveness, adaptation is the highest learning, right? That shows the highest intelligence, which means if you develop that learning, you can adapt to social conditions, physical conditions. So what they did actually is this. In the proactive steps, again, they were doing RTI and PBS separately. I didn't tell them what to do about the RTI and PBS. What I did actually, ask them and give them opportunity to unite their practices, existing practices and new ones. For example, as you can see, they put these proactive steps: family engagement, educator support. Before, their academic and behavioral curriculum was focusing on the individual child who is struggling, a disabled child, or child with disability. With this one, focuses both children, all students, and adults. So teachers are receiving support too, without any kind of negative connotations. Before, as a teacher, let's say, I'm working at the middle school and I'm raising my hand, I said, I cannot do it. And principal will say, well, obviously you're not good at your job. There's that kind of fear of teachers, right? But principal said, recognize that everyone should learn, everyone can change, and needs support. So supporting the educators. As you can see over here, in the engaging curriculum, they operationalize that. This is very important. So rather than saying engaging curriculum, those are great slogans. They don't mean anything if you don't operationalize them. So they operationalize like this: professional development on culture responsive practices, implementing culture responsive practice, high access instruction, educator effectiveness, walkthroughs, observations. So educators learning from each other. And educator support, self-reflection, coaching. And as you can see, I'm not going to go through all, but they built their own part. For example, they use universal expectations, interventions called tab-in, take a break in, take a break out, and they define their agreements, the teachers' tools, they call the cool tools. As you can see, it's a well-thought-of plan. It took 1 year for them to develop. An original plan, their existing system was $2. $2. Look what happened. Again, they did lots of things before the Learning Lab. I'm not just saying with the Learning Lab, they just started to do the great things. They were doing different things, but they didn't know that. They didn't communicate. They didn't coordinate their efforts. There wasn't any kind of overall system-wide understanding of those resources and struggles. With this one, they map out their system. They developed a better system and behavioral support. And over here, their data. They have student interviews. Rather than looking at the student's number, students' case IEPs, they said, what if we talk with students? What if we interview them? Right? It's a simple question. Then, since it's a middle school, they look at the data from the incoming 6th graders before they come to middle school, and they use the analysis for the behavioral conduct, students, and teacher data. So they look at the teacher data, which means which classroom teachers are using those behavioral referrals, which classroom teachers are a little bit struggling with the teaching math or curriculum. So again, not to put them in a bad position, but provide them adequate support. Is that clear? That's positive means positive. High expectations means high expectations for everyone. High expectations from our teachers, high expectations from our students. And again, the idea is not to punish them, not to monitor them, not to expect them to follow our lead, but we gave teachers and psychologists the power to create their learning environment and have the saying over what kind of schools they want to build. So in 3 minutes, given the time, I'm just going to go back and finalize my presentation. I know tomorrow we are going to talk more about this. But I just want to give you one example over here. This is the school's prior behavior support team, which was overseeing not just on the behavior, but also academic interventions. This is high school, 13. It used to be 13 school staff. Look at the Learning Lab. Same number. We had 6 school staff, 3 parents, 3 community members, and 1 student in this decision-making team. And as the student put over here, this is the Latino student who participated in the Learning Lab. It says, it's a sense of accomplishment. We brought all sorts of parties to the table. They bring just that one piece of information that can be crucial to what we are trying to accomplish, the solution to the problem. Even just the fact that the people are interested in solving the problem, that's enough. That's what really works. So these are my conclusion. It's possible to form and maintain inclusive and productive problem-solving teams with local stakeholders. Do you remember we are talking about inclusion in terms of building those kind of classrooms where all students with different exceptionalities, abilities, disabilities can learn. We are building schools now and blurring the boundaries between school and the family, school and the community, so that we can unite the forces. So this is the next generation of RTI and PBIS, where we try to unite our forces to address our own issues. So the second part is sustainability is important. And that requires a larger systemic thinking of decision making. Hopefully in Kuwait you are going to organize this one thanks to the KALD's efforts. You are going to inform the public and decision makers about this one because again, great practices cannot sustain itself. We know the education reform literature in the United States. It takes a 10 year, a decade to change a school culture. 10 years, if everything goes well. Same principal, same teachers, funding is over there. It takes a 10 years to create a new school culture. 10 years. If we don't have the sustained effort, if we don't continue to fight for our inclusive schools, they are going to disappear, unfortunately. As teachers, we can do great things, working with individual students. But individual teacher versus all teachers are united. Individual group of teachers versus the teachers, families, community representatives, decision makers are united. They are going to create better sustained outcomes. So the last part is the scaling up. So what we learn from our schools should inform our policies. Those are the key ideas again. I think the question I'm asking, I think we should talk about this one. In this great Kuwait city, how can you implement, or if you can implement culture responsive, which means your own integrated multi-tier models of RTI and PBIS for all students so that we can create inclusive, supportive, positive classroom cultures, school cultures and climates, but also transparent, fair, effective, and efficient behavioral and academic systems for all. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me over here.
Thank you, Dr. Bal. I think we would resume now and we'll adjourn now for the break. We will be having half an hour. Now it's 3:15, so we will get back together 4:15, so we'll get back together 4:45. All right? There is refreshment. You can find refreshment, coffee, whatever outside, so serve yourself, and we will resume in 30 minutes. Thank you.